Here's a strange fact. Most people have written a poem at least once in their lives, even if they don't remember it. A birthday message that got a little longer than planned, a note they wrote and then panicked about sending, a few lines scribbled in a notebook when they were bored, annoyed, or wide awake at 11:47 p.m. for no good reason. They just didn't call it a poem because poem sounded like something that required a cape and a serious expression. That's the problem with poetry. It has a reputation that scares people off. It sounds official. It sounds like it has to rhyme perfectly, deal with enormous subjects, or float down from a mountain wearing a scarf. So a lot of us decide pretty early that poetry is not for us. I'm here to tell you that decision is a mistake and slightly dramatic. You do not need permission to write a poem. You don't need a special notebook, a dramatic life story, or some mysterious talent that only arrives by certified mail. If you can notice something and put words on a page, you already have the basic equipment. That's the whole starter kit. We're not going to spend a lot of time inventing a perfect definition of poetry. Definitions have a habit of making simple things feel complicated, like explaining how to walk until nobody can take a step. Instead, we're going to focus on something more useful, how to begin. By the end of this lecture, you'll be able to explain what a poem can do, describe what a poet actually is, understand why desire matters more than talent, start a poem of your own. None of this is secret knowledge. None of it belongs only to other people. I'll walk you through a few clear ideas, and then you'll get a chance to try them. You don't have to become a capital P poet. You only have to write a poem. That's more than enough. Before we go further, you're going to write for a few minutes. This is the Quick Writing Challenge, a short practice you'll see in every lecture in this series. Think of one small moment from today or yesterday. Nothing dramatic. Waiting somewhere, hearing a sound, noticing a detail in a hallway, classroom, bus, or at home. Write a few lines that try to catch the moment with specific details. Don't explain the feeling, let the details do the work. This is practice, not a finished poem. Keep the pen moving. Pause the video now. Complete the Quick Writing Challenge. Press play when you have a few lines on the page. Let's start with a basic question. Where did poetry even come from? The short answer is that no one invented it on a Tuesday afternoon. Poetry is old, older than books, older than most of the things we think of as writing. Long before people had paper or pens, they had stories they needed to remember. Stories about where they came from, what happened to their families, what the world was like. Those stories got passed around the fire from one person to the next, and certain ways of saying things made the stories stick better in the mind. Rhythm helped, repetition helped, a strong image helped. Over time, those ways of speaking turned into what we now call poetry. In other words, poetry began as a practical tool. It helped people remember. It helped them mark important moments. It helped them say something that ordinary conversation couldn't quite hold. A poem could take a big piece of life and boil it down to its strongest parts. One clear image or one sharp phrase could carry more meaning than a long explanation. That's still true today. You don't need to know a lot of history to write a poem, but it helps to remember this. Poetry was never meant to be a museum piece. It started as something people used. It was useful. It still is. A poem can hold a feeling so you don't have to carry it alone. It can freeze a moment so it doesn't disappear. It can say the thing you didn't know how to say out loud. Poet Gwendolyn Brooks once called poetry life distilled. That's a good way to think about it. You take a large amount of experience, a day, a year, a single complicated afternoon, and you boil it down until only the most important parts are left. What's left is the poem. Here's a simple way to see that idea. First, there is experience, a real moment, feeling, or memory. Then comes selection. You keep only what still has heat. What remains on the page is the poem, concentrated language. Not everything that happened, just the part that still matters. Think about an ordinary school day, not the dramatic parts, the regular ones, the sound of the hallway right after the bell, when everyone is moving at once and someone's locker won't open. The exact way the bus smells in the afternoon. The scrape of a chair in a quiet classroom. The moment you notice a friend is upset before they say anything. Most of that day will not become a poem. It doesn't need to. But if you pay attention, one or two of those details might stay warm. The hallway noise, the stuck locker, the look on your friend's face. A poem doesn't try to keep the whole day. It keeps the part that still has heat and lets the rest go. That selection is the work. That's the distillation. You already do a version of this when you tell a story and leave out the boring parts so the good parts hit harder. Poetry just does that with more tension. So when people act like poetry is some rare, delicate thing that only a few special people are allowed to touch, they're forgetting its actual history. Poetry belongs to anyone who has something to say and is willing to shape the words carefully enough that someone else can feel it. That's where poetry comes from, and that's why you're allowed to try it. Listen to how a small, ordinary moment can be held so it doesn't disappear. These lines are from Gary Soto's poem, Oranges. The first time I walked with a girl, I was 12, cold and weighted down, with 2 oranges in my jacket. Nothing dramatic. See, it's nothing dramatic. Just a cold day, a walk, and 2 oranges. But the details make the moment stay. Notice what Soto keeps. He doesn't say, I was nervous, or it was a big moment. He gives you cold. He gives you weighted down. He gives you 2 oranges in a jacket. Those details do the feeling for him. You can almost feel the pockets. That's the craft move. Choose the specific things that carry the emotion and trust them. You don't have to announce the feeling if the image is clear enough. Ordinary writing and poetry often do different jobs. Ordinary writing explains or reports. It often uses general words and tries to cover everything. A poem concentrates feeling. It relies on specific images. It keeps only what still has heat. That difference is one of the most useful things you can remember when you sit down to write. So, what exactly is a poet? Here's the simplest answer, and it's still the best one. A poet is someone who writes poems. That's it. No membership card, no entrance exam, no required uniform, no interview with a panel of serious people in turtlenecks. A long time ago, people had bigger ideas about poets. In ancient Greece, they sometimes thought of the poet as kind of a seer, someone who received ideas from somewhere beyond themselves, possibly involving a muse and excellent lighting. Impressive. Not especially helpful when you're staring at a blank page wondering if you're allowed to begin. Today, we still drag around a few stereotypes. The poet in all black, staring dramatically out a rainy window, surrounded by coffee cups and the weight of the universe. Or the idea that only special people get to write poems and the rest of us should stick to group chats and grocery lists. Or that a poem has to sound complicated or it doesn't count. Those images are mostly noise. The truth is quieter and much wider. Poets are regular people who have decided to pay close attention to language and experience. They might be students, they might work after school, they might be the person who notices the exact sound of rain on a cafeteria roof or the way a friend's voice changes when they're trying not to cry, and then tries to get that detail onto a page so it doesn't vanish. You already do a version of this noticing. You hear the exact change in a friend's voice when they're trying not to cry. You see the way the light hits a row of lockers at the end of the day. You remember the sound of a house when everyone else has gone quiet. Those observations are the raw material. The poet is simply someone who decides those details are worth shaping into lines so they don't disappear. Being a poet is less of a job title and more of a habit. It's noticing carefully, choosing words on purpose, and being willing to change the lines until they say what you actually mean. You don't have to do it every day for the rest of your life to count. You only have to do it while you're writing the poem. Look at how specific details make a feeling real. These lines are from Langston Hughes' Mother to Son. Well, son, I'll tell you. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up. The poem doesn't just say life has been hard. It gives you tacks, splinters, and torn up boards. You can feel the difference. If you've ever written a few lines that tried to capture a moment or a feeling, you've already stepped into that habit, even if only for a few minutes. That's enough to start. The title poet is not something other people get to hand out. It's something you claim by doing the writing. Now, we need to talk about the word that stops a lot of people before they even start: talent. Some of you are already thinking it. I'm not talented at this. Other people are just naturally gifted at writing. I'm not one of those. No. Here's the honest answer. Talent's overrated. That doesn't mean skill doesn't matter. It does. But the idea that you either have a special gift or you don't is one of the most useful excuses ever invented for not trying. It's like deciding you'll never be decent at basketball because the first shot bounced off the rim and someone's little brother laughed. Possible outcome. Not a great long-term strategy. Desire matters more. The people who get better at writing poems are usually the ones who keep coming back to the page, even when the first version is awkward, flat, or mildly embarrassing. They read other poems. They notice how a line works. They try something, decide it isn't quite right, and try again. That habit, showing up and paying attention, builds more real skill than waiting for talent to arrive wearing a name tag. Think about anything else you've improved at: a sport, an instrument, a game. The first time you tried, it probably felt awkward. Maybe someone else's little brother was better on day one. That didn't mean you were permanently untalented. It meant you were at the beginning. The people who got better were the ones who kept showing up for the slightly uncomfortable practice phase. Writing works the same way. Showing up to the page doesn't mean waiting for a perfect mood or a perfect idea. It means opening the notebook even when the first line feels dumb. It means reading a poem like you like and trying one small move from it. It means writing 3 ordinary lines about a real moment and then asking which detail is strongest. That is practice. It looks ordinary from the outside. It builds skills anyway. Reading helps more than almost anything else. When you read poems that move you, something quiet happens. The rhythms get into your ear. The way a writer turns a regular moment into something sharper starts to influence how you see your own moments. You don't have to copy those poems. You just have to let them teach you what's possible. You also don't need a dramatic life to write. Some of the strongest poems come from small, ordinary things noticed closely. The way someone waits, the sound of a hallway after the bell, the exact feeling of carrying something you don't want to put down yet. What matters is the attention you bring to it. So if you've been waiting to feel talented enough before you begin, you can stop waiting. Wanting to write is already the most important ingredient. The rest is practice, reading, and the willingness to make something that isn't perfect yet. You don't have to be the best writer in the room. You only have to be willing to write the next line. Once you've written a poem, what do you actually do with it? Some people act like a poem only counts if it gets published or performed in front of a room full of nodding strangers who all happen to be wearing berets. That's a lot of pressure. It's like baking cookies and then deciding they don't count unless a professional chef tastes them, rates them, and posts a review with lighting. Most of us just want the cookies. Here's the good news. A poem can have a much smaller, more reasonable life and still be completely real. You can keep it private. It can stay in your notebook and never leave. You can share it with one person. Sometimes one reader is enough. You can revise it later when you have new ideas or when the first version makes you cringe in a useful way. You can read it aloud, even just to yourself, which is a surprisingly good way to find out what still feels false. A poem does not fail just because it never leaves your backpack. Of course, poems can go further. You might eventually read one in front of people, even if your voice does that slightly traitorous shaky thing. You might give one to someone who needs it. You might keep working on it until it feels strong enough to send out into the world. Those are good possibilities. They are just not requirements. You can also just keep the rough version and come back later. The first draft doesn't have to be impressive. It has to exist. A poem that sits in a notebook for 2 weeks and then gets one stronger image added is still doing real work. The bar for a first poem is not brilliance. The bar is that you wrote it down. Before we finish, you're going to write again. Not later, not in your head, on the page. I'm giving you 3 short exercises. You don't have to complete all 3 right now, but you are expected to choose at least one and do it with real attention. These are not optional daydreams. They are practice. The only way this work helps you is if you actually try it. Exercise 1. The poem you already like. Think of a poem you have genuinely enjoyed. Write down one specific thing that works in it. An image, a repeated line, a feeling of honesty, anything clear. Then write 4 to 6 lines of your own that practice a similar move. You're not copying, you're learning by doing. Exercise 2. The ordinary moment. Choose one small, real moment from the last few days. Nothing dramatic is required. Walking, waiting, hearing a sound, noticing light on a surface. Write 3 to 5 lines that capture that moment with a specific detail. Avoid big emotional words if you can. Let the details do the work. You may want to build on your quick writing challenge. Exercise 3. Keep what works. Look at any lines you have already written during this lecture. Read them out loud once. Underline the strongest image or phrase, the part that feels most alive. Then copy that underlined part and add 2 to 3 new lines that grow from it. That is the piece worth keeping and building on. Take this seriously. You don't need a perfect poem today. You do need writing on the page that makes the length asked for. Pause the video now. Complete at least one exercise carefully. Press play only when you have real lines written down. Here is what I want you to carry away from today. Poetry is not a private club. It began as a practical way for people to remember what mattered and to say things that ordinary people could not quite hold. A poet is simply someone who writes poems. The stereotypes are mostly noise. Talent is helpful when it appears, but desire and practice matter more. And a poem does not have to be published or performed to count. It can stay private, be shared with one person, or grow through revision. You get to decide. Most important, you don't need permission to begin. In the next lecture, we will move from these big questions into the first real craft tool, image. You will learn why a specific detail is almost always stronger than a general emotion word, and you will practice turning ordinary moments into lines a reader can actually see, hear, and feel. That skill alone can change the way your writing works. If you are still nervous, that is normal. A lot of good writers feel unsure at the start of a poem. Nervousness does not mean you are in the wrong place. It usually means you care enough to want the words to be honest. You do not have to feel confident to begin. You only have to be willing to try. Keep the lines you wrote today, even the rough ones. They're evidence that you started. That already puts you ahead of everyone who is still waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect talent. You don't have to become a capital P poet. You only have to write the next poem. Start where you are. Write what you notice. That is enough.